Greetings, members of the internet. This is your favorite KZSU host, DJ Trump, living rent-free in your heads, and also no longer on KZSU. Okay, whatever. That's a relic of the past, which we honor on this station and on this program, unlike so much of the rest of the country right now. But that's a topic for another time. With me today, I have my usual co-host and perhaps saner half, George, the Vanguard. And I also have a good friend of ours from India, Devansh, who is here to talk about some recent geopolitical developments. Thank you for coming on, Devansh.
Thank you for having me.
So, most people might not be aware of this particular detail, but there is actually a disputed border region between China and India, the two most populous states in the world. And recently, there have been tensions that have begun to flare up there. So, Devansh, do you have any more details? Or George, would you like to weigh in on that?
Let's let Devansh go first. He probably has the most to say.
Yeah. I've been tracking this situation ever since it began back in early May. So the interesting thing is that India and China have a completely undemarcated and disputed boundary. There is the notion of a line of actual control that exists in all the western, middle, and eastern sectors of the boundary, but there are differing perceptions on both the sides, and both sides have in some places the maps of both China and India are the same and they have the same location for the boundary. In other places they differ. Now, as everybody knows about China, they feel that their time has come, and being the second most powerful country of the world, they think that they can start becoming aggressive and unilaterally changing the status quo on several parts of the line of actual control. So so the dispute right now is confined to the northernmost Indian Union territory of Ladakh, part of which is controlled by China as a result of the 1962 war, and there is Chinese have unilaterally claimed sovereignty over Galwan Valley, have changed the status quo on of the line of actual control, which I'll henceforth refer to as the LAC. There's this beautiful lake called the Pangong Tso Lake, 1/3 of which is controlled by India and the 2/3 by China, and the third in Hot Springs area. There was an attempt by the Chinese side. There were hectic negotiations for a withdrawal, for a de-escalation, and on June 6th, the senior military commanders of both sides met, and there was, sort of a negotiated plan for de-escalation, but that all fell apart on June 15th when the Chinese tried to erect some structures on the Indian side, and when the Indian soldiers went and dismantled those structures, that led to violence in which many unofficial accounts of the Chinese claim that Indian soldiers went and crossed the LAC and attacked the Chinese soldiers. So there have been fatalities on the border after 45 years, and the kind of seriousness of the fatalities is something that has happened only after 53 years. And that's a result of India's significant improvement in border infrastructure, which has irritated the Chinese, because now the frequent intrusions and salami slicing tactics of Indian territory are being continuously checked by Indian forces.
All right, salami slicing tactics. Could you elaborate on that, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So as I said that India and China haven't yet formally agreed on sort of a mutually agreed border between both sides. India has tried to get the Chinese to do the negotiating table and start drawing up a border, but the Chinese side has always stalled the negotiations. They kind of see the border as a as a leverage against India, in which they can continuously press India on a boundary through incursions and unilaterally changing the LAC. So what the Chinese have done is that they have gradually tried to take small tidbits of territory in the northern Union territory of Ladakh by rapidly improving the infrastructure and getting their forces to intrude more frequently on Indian territory. That's how they have gradually tried to expand the line of control uh, towards the Indian side, and they have tried to gradually shrink it. Now, this government is like the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been quite proactive in building border infrastructure that has stopped the Chinese patrols from unilaterally coming and expanding their territorial claims. So
Right.
that is the cause of friction.
Okay, so if I may give some backstory for the audience, India and the Indian subcontinent in general was under the control of the British Empire until immediately after World War II. And in 1947, India was partitioned into India and Pakistan. But the way that some of the territory was split up, particularly the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, was highly contentious. It was a predominantly Muslim region, but simultaneously, many of its rulers were Hindu. So when the country was split along largely religiously sectarian lines, the territory was disputed by both countries. But China also claimed some of the territory in the north. As Devansh was saying, the Indian government recognizes that territory as part of its Ladakh province. However, China calls the territory Aksai Chin, and of course Pakistan controls part of Kashmir as well in practice, although the territory is disputed between India and Pakistan. Interestingly enough, Pakistan and China both recognize each other's claims to the disputed area, or their sections of the disputed area, but that's actually another interesting point. India is facing geopolitical pressures from Pakistan and China. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a good basis of the underlying history of how we got to this point, where there was a disputed border between India and China. Am I leaving anything out?
Yeah, you're leaving one thing out, that is the Union Territory of, there was a significant change back in August 2019 when the Indian government, they revoked the autonomy given to the erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir province, and they split the Jammu and Kashmir, the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. One part was Ladakh, which is a mountainous and Buddhist dominated region. The other part is the Kashmir Valley and the Jammu region. So Pakistan controls a bit of the Kashmir section, and China controls a bit of the Ladakh, a significant portion of the Ladakh section, which they had quote unquote won in the 1962 war, which was a disastrous military defeat for India.
Right. Another fun fact, the K in Pakistan actually stands for Kashmir because it's supposed to, Pakistan itself is supposed to be an acronym including multiple different ethnic groups.
Yeah. So, if I may jump in. So another interesting note, and Devansh, I would ask you to elaborate on this because I'm not an expert, but just the people, Ladakh is very not densely populated at all. It doesn't have a lot of people in it. So, it tends to have a very unique culture compared to even the other regions, which obviously, as everyone should know, India has a lot in common. You have about 80% of Hindus, people largely at least are embracing Hindi, even if they didn't speak it initially, along with English, and there's culture of education, etc. But there are also large differences. And I think Ladakh is one of the most unique parts of India. So it's also, though, important to note that most people in that region are Muslim, but they also tend to be partial to Indian control. They tend to prefer India compared to Pakistan or China. So it's kind of interesting to discuss the people there and what do they think about, this whole conflict and the great power conflict, embodied in it, as opposed to also the military situation on the ground. So I think that's just an important thing we need to bring up when we bring up Ladakh.
Oh yeah. So as you're talking about Ladakh, the interesting thing is I would like to correct you out that it's not exactly Muslim majority. I just had a look at the demographics. It's actually Muslim plurality would be a better way to put it. So it's 46% Muslim and around 61%, around 61% Buddhist and Hindu. So However, like
46 and 61.
Buddhists and Hindus combined are 61%. So that, sorry, 51%. Mind my arithmetic. So Buddhists are 40% and Hindus are like around 11%. So like yeah, the interesting thing is that there hasn't been much of a separatist tendency amongst the Ladakhi Muslims, and that's actually quite a good thing. And they are. I have been watching news reports from the ground in Ladakh, and especially the capital of the Ladakh Union Territory called this small town called Leh. And people, regardless of their religion and ethnicity, are quite scared of Chinese occupation. They actually hate the Chinese pretty much. Who wants to be a part of a communist dictatorship that will kill off your any ethnicity that's not Han Chinese? Period. So,
To Hong Kong.
oh yes,
Press F
Hong
in the
Kong.
chat.
Yeah, so you have even lesser incentives to join China if you're not Han Chinese. So you can. So people in Ladakh are pretty scared of Chinese occupation, and they're quite patriotic, and they really and they have been quite worried about this salami slicing tactics of China, as a lot of the pastures and grazing grounds available for the nomadic tribes, all these nomadic tribes in the Ladakh that live near the China border. Their a lot of their pastures and grazing territory has been gradually shrinking due to China's expansionist policies. So they're quite firm, and they really want the Indian government to have a very solid response to uh, to this entire Chinese this entire escalation of tensions with China. And I've seen that there's a lot of clarion call for military action out there in Ladakh. Yeah.
Right. I think another important point to note is the realities of geography if we're going to talk about geopolitics. The fact that Ladakh is a mountainous region is incredibly important because for conventional military forces, it's very difficult to cross mountains. We've seen that in ancient times, we see that in modern times. And the general mountainous terrain between India and China has actually limited a lot of their economic and cultural exchange, which is part of the reason why those countries or those regions historically, because of course they weren't always unified under one polity, have remained so distinct over time. But on top of that, that's also why it's so important for China to control many of these territories, particularly Tibet, because a lot of their water comes out of Tibet, for instance. A lot of the rivers are fed by the snow caps there. So agriculturally, it's very important for them to do that. And that's why they're moving in all the Han Chinese settlers and they're repressing the local culture, and why they want to control all this mountainous territory, both in order to safeguard their own water supply and thus their agriculture and some of their independence, but also to safeguard their border against India, which is a rising great power right on their border. So there's maneuvering going on right now. So
go ahead.
I guess my next question would be, what are the implications of this alignment for the long-term interests of the world? Obviously the current superpower of the United States, but also China, India, Pakistan, other countries in the region. Are you seeing Pakistan and China begin to move more closely, and do you think that there'll be a corresponding shift of India and the United States cooperating more closely? What do you think? Do you think this will escalate, or do you think this will be controlled? I have so many questions.
Yeah. So to begin with, I think like when the Modi government came into power in 2014, they, like really sort of they try to handle all the, try to set aside all the border differences for the greater engagement with China. Like Prime Minister Modi aggressively reached out to President Xi Jinping of China, and try to forge a personal connection of bond with President Xi, but President Xi, my pronunciation. So there were personal one-on-one summits held in Wuhan in 2018 and 2019, and despite very serious military standoffs in 2014, 2015, and 2017, and 2017 was almost about to escalate to war, as it was a bit less serious than the previous one. than the current one, but it was quite serious too in Doklam in Sikkim. So there was so the Indian government, they really tried to engage with China, try to have a good trade relationship with China, but apparently India is like, after this violence that happened in the border on June 15th, the Indian government has been forced to do a rethink on its entire geopolitical alliances and alignment. I think, yes, obviously Pakistan and China will grow more closer as a result of, these increase in tensions with India. India is going to get much more openly hostile to China because they see that, despite all the engagement, President Xi doesn't seem to be interested in reciprocating any kind of goodwill. And yes, India is going to end up going closer to the United States. The only worry that I see from the Indian side is that is on the reliability of United States as a partner. Recently, like there's been a reveal by John Bolton that President Xi was about President Trump asked President Xi for some help on getting re-elected. Now that's the kind of stuff that makes the Indian government really worried about, even if it's true or untrue, the fact that this kind of information is flowing out of America makes India really worried as to whether United States can actually be a trusted partner. But otherwise, there's great potential, and there has been greater engagement between United States and India, and and I see India becoming much closer to the United States now. The good thing for the United States in a way is that India does not specifically want any kind of a military protection against China, as a lot of scholars have noted that Indian military is sufficiently strong enough to handle China, as we saw actually on the June 15th clashes itself, when in the Indian government claims that the number of Chinese casualties were double the Indian casualties, and that too, these casualties were of Chinese special forces, not whereas the soldiers fighting from the Indian side were completely ordinary soldiers of the Bihar regiment. So there's going to be greater economic kind of a decoupling from China. The Prime Minister Modi had already started that from May 15th address, in which he said that he wants to build a self-reliant India. So there's going to be more economic decoupling, greater ties of India especially economic ties of India with the United States, the Western world, and countries hostile to China. And there's going to be a lot of work on addressing India's enormous trade deficit with respect to China. So, yeah.
May I?
Yeah.
So if I may jump in, you mentioned John Bolton earlier, and one of the things that concerns me is that while I think India is obviously looking for a good relationship here, one of the problems I think that is inherent to any diplomatic relationship is that you have to know the domestic politics of the country that you're working with. And I think one of the biggest problems with having someone like Bolton is that he's very loud. He makes a lot of noise, but he also lies a lot. And he's actually even in the past openly commented that if he had to lie to get something he wanted, he would. So I think it's also important to note that he shouldn't be trusted, but unfortunately I can understand why Indians might believe him, and that unless people are very, very aware of of basically his particular agenda, it's very easy to believe that he's some sort of honest actor. But yeah, the other thing I would like to add on that, on top of that, is that I think that I generally agree with Devansh's thoughts regarding the potential of an India-U.S. relationship, because I think generally, culturally, it appears that China is just so distinct that I think that the U.S. and India are closer than the U.S. and China are. And also, I would say that it's geopolitically very favorable for the Indians to have China be marginalized, and it's also very geopolitically favorable for the United States. So I think that just very fundamentally, it's very easy to get that over with, and to get some progress on that, and to keep that long term.
Okay, so there are two ancillary points I'd like to make. First off, I would like to welcome George and many of our friends in the audience to the John Bolton hate train. I've been here for a while. Choo choo. And secondly, I'd like to talk a little bit about India's domestic politics, because I do think it's important doing this alliance to sort of note some of the developments there. So over the past few years, the Gujarat National Party, am I getting that right, the BJP?
Yeah, the BJP, it's called the Bharatiya Janata Party. Yeah.
Right. Gujarat is one of the names for India in Hindi, if I'm not mistaken.
For India, what's the name? What did you say? Could you just repeat it?
Gujarat?
No, that's not one of the names. We use Bharat, and the other one name.
I must be mispronouncing it. Is it like BHAJRAT?
There's no J. It's BHARAT. It's been the name for India for like thousands of years. Yeah.
Okay, I've seen it spelled with a J. Maybe that's just issues of Romanizing a non-language. But in any case, still, I mean, that's how it's pronounced, folks.
Yeah.
In any case, as we talked about earlier, India is an incredibly diverse country, ethnically, in terms of language. I mean, the Hindi language is widely spoken, particularly in the Ganges River Valley. But at the time, I mean, Hinduism is itself an incredibly diverse religion with thousands of gods and regional variations. So, I don't know. I mean, I do know that the BJP, I'm not going to try to pronounce it anymore.
Yeah, that's the best way.
BJP has been trying to install more civic nationalism by trying to organize around the dharmic faiths. I mean, including Hinduism, but also having a broader tent that would include other Hindu-derived faiths, such as I mean, I guess calling Buddhism Hindu-derived isn't completely inaccurate, but at the same time, they may object. But anybody who believes in the Dharma and the cycle of reincarnation, there's been some complaints, particularly in Western observed publications, about marginalization of Muslims. You spoke earlier about people in the Ladakh province. Am I saying that correctly? Ladakh.
Yeah, that's the accurate pronunciation.
Right, being very patriotic and very supportive of the government. Is that more product of them being afraid of China, and are you worried that policies promoting sort of this dharmic nationalism might alienate them, or do you think that they're going to stay on the team, essentially?
So an important factor, like, the difference between Kashmiri Muslims and Ladakhi Muslims is that the quote-unquote occupier, the external threat that both of them face is different. So with regards to Kashmir, it's an Islamic republic an Islamic state that wants to occupy the entire valley. So it's quite easy for that like insurgent Muslims living in the Kashmir valley to identify with the other Islamic republic and support calls for merger with that. There is nothing. However, on the other hand, in Ladakh, there is not even an iota of cultural, ethnic, or religious similarity that any resident of Ladakh, be it Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu, has with China. So, in that sense, they very clearly see China as a threat. And the second thing is that it's been my considered opinion that the kind of rumor mongering and the kind of disinformation that has spread from the Western media about BJP's Hindu nationalistic policies is actually quite overblown. You're not going to have concentration camps for Muslims. You're not going to have Muslims stripped of their citizenship. You're not going to have Muslims.
Like in China, however, there are concentration camps in China.
Yeah, there are concentration camps in China, and the way Western media, and a large section of Indian media too, has overblown BJP's, Hindu nationalistic policies is frankly ridiculous. And so I don't think that the Ladakhi Muslims are going to go anywhere regardless of India's, Hindu nationalistic bent, like whichever way you see it. Because, firstly, none of the, stuff that the Hindu nationalists are particularly excited about, and that's that stuff like, reclamation of ancient temples which were demolished by Islamic invaders and converted to mosques, or conversion of or general religious violence by Muslims. All of that stuff doesn't happen in Ladakh. So in that sense, like Hindu nationalism is quite peripheral to Ladakh. Ladakh has its own problems. I've been fortunate to be friends. I used in my high school. I had a good friend from Ladakh, and they told me there have been a lot of tensions between Buddhists and Muslims out there. But I feel that because of such a strong external threat, those tensions have generally uh, been kept to a lid. Let's put it this way. They have been kept severely limited, and by and large, Ladakh is quite peaceful on that front.
All right. So pivoting a little bit into other geopolitical conflicts in the region, what kind of stake do you believe India has in the South China Sea conflict? Obviously, India doesn't border to the South China Sea, but it's a major point of international shipping. And obviously, China's recently been trying to exert more control by building artificial islands and claiming military bases in what would usually be international waters and trying to push the United States Navy out on occasion. What do you think India has to do with that conflict?
Oh yeah. As of India has always voiced support for the global freedom of navigation, and and South China Sea is definitely a part of it. Now, India hasn't explicitly called out that the South China Sea needs to be shared between China and all the other southeastern nations, which it tries to bully, right? So, however, like because of this, greater hostilities between India and China, the future trajectory I see of India's stance on South China Sea is definitely going to be on the side of the small southeastern nations that are continuously bullied by China, who wants to have undisputed, sovereignty over the South China Sea, which is frankly unacceptable. Uh, some Indian strategists have even called for the Indian Navy to conduct military exercises in the South China Sea, perhaps in uh, in partnership with other allies such as the United States, Japan, and Australia, and obviously the other southeastern nations which have a claim to South China Sea. So I think there might be a decision. Like there hasn't been much stuff from the Indian government on that front, but you might see more stuff on it. Just thanks to all the reckless escalation that China has caused in the Himalayas.
All right. Another question, and this might be one that's harder to answer by its nature. And after this, I'm sorry for cutting you off, George. I'll let you talk. I promise. There have been recent reports that there might be a second wave of coronavirus outbreaks in China, and obviously there's massive unrest with the Hong Kong issue. So how much of China's aggression do you think is being fueled by internal problems?
And like I've been actually studying this exact issue over the past couple of days, and well, I don't think any of us have actually have any of you been to China or something? But I haven't. But I don't have a sufficient idea of what goes on inside China. Nobody does, frankly. So, but I think I can give you some some broad direction as to what's happening. I think India is not one of the countries which Chinese learn from a young age as being an oppressor or being an evil colonizer, unlike the Western world, like United States and UK and other Western countries. In Japan, especially, Japan is considered quite an evil nation by the ordinary Chinese public. So, and you must remember another thing is that most of the Chinese population, the vast majority of Chinese people live really, really far away from the border with India. The converse is not true. Most of the India's population, especially the Gangetic Plains, people like the heart center of India's population lives quite close to the Chinese border. So comparatively speaking, of course.
Right, of course. And just for reference, a lot of China's population is on the seaboard. I mean, this is a pattern shared across the world because of access to trade and also historically access to fishing, which is one of the better gigs if you want to have something to eat as a protein source. But India is concentrated and historically has been concentrated in the Ganges River Valley, which extends inland pretty substantially, so that creates a different dynamic. Also, I'd like to point out that much of China's population is in particular on the south end of their coast, which is why the South China Sea is so crucial because so much shipping goes to and from there.
So yeah, you could imagine that the Chinese public has, very strong. You can whip up, a sense of nationalism in the Chinese public by, aggression on Japan or aggression in the South China Sea, because most of the people live out there, and you know, have it somehow or the other impacts their lives. Now, like I think this kind of aggression in the on the Indian side, like on in Tibet and Ladakh, that's mostly because of broader geopolitical reasons, and that's because the China like knows that India is a country of similar size and resources, just that its economy is quite behind right now. But tomorrow, 10, 15 years down the line, if India is a country of similar economic size as China, then China will get a run for its money in its superpower ambitions. And that's what China wishes to, show to India, that they want to quote unquote put India in its place, and sort of, hurt the Indian national morale such that it can never, rise to a similar level as China has done today. So I think it's more of an external geopolitical calculations that are going on. And so obviously the second thing is that, Xi Jinping's desire to proclaim himself the emperor of the world, rather than any other, any domestic kind of, compulsions that might be facing the Chinese side.
All right. So George, what are your thoughts on this matter?
I think that just in a very broad sense, China versus India is obviously the major geopolitical conflict of Asia, and I would argue, in the top 5 at least in the world in the next few years, in the next few decades. And I think Devansh brings up a very good point that India will obviously continue to have economic growth, we can hope, and there's evidence to believe that it's going to continue to have very brisk economic growth and have a lot of improvement in quality of life, but also in the ability to assert its national authority on the international stage. So it will be able, and I think it will grow more quickly than China. There's definitely evidence that China is not growing much at all right now, even though its official figures show that it has only slowed down a bit. We all know that China has a long history of being dishonest about its economic growth numbers. So there's very good reason to believe that India is growing far faster than China. And while India is significantly behind right now, obviously faster growth will allow it to continue to catch up. And I think we need to remember that India does not need to surpass China in overall GDP in order to become a significant enough competitor that China really can't cow it. Really, particularly because the Himalayas are a boundary, and obviously China can't just go rolling in, but also because India has its own diaspora, it has its own set of allies that it's growing, and it has its own access to a large ocean, which even today is used for trade, although it was used even more so in history. India just needs to get to the point that it is competitive with China, and I would say it is getting close to there, if not already there, in order for China not to be able to push it around anymore. And obviously we can see that the long time, or I wouldn't say long time, but reasonably established alliance between China and Pakistan is a testament to how much China takes the India threat seriously. So I think India's future is bright with regard to China, and I think that it is an opportunity for the U.S., even if the U.S. continues to have various different challenges, to maintain significant authority in Asia by throwing in its lot with India and working with a rising power that is becoming more able to pull its own weight in an alliance, which I think is a very good win-win for all.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. This is a win-win situation by both sides, by American side and both by an Indian side. because and I think I'll reiterate the military aspect of it is that India does not require any kind of military protection from the United States the same way Japan does or South Korea does or that or Germany does. Of course there can be like a steady supply of good defense equipment, but there is no such the good thing is that the alliance is in a completely win-win situation for the United States and India.
Okay. I guess I would wonder, Devansh, just to keep in mind what all the issues that are underlying this. I think there's one more thing that we really need to look at, and that is, what does India do in order to ensure that no internal divisions keep it any weaker against China than it must be? As in, I know that you mentioned earlier that Islam, is obviously big within India, but you were suggesting that Muslims obviously are not especially sympathetic to China after how the Uyghurs have been treated.
Yeah.
And in also all the different other minorities in India have mostly been uninterested in taking China's side in this or being disloyal. How do you think you can put a bow on that when, say, Pakistan is also sort of on China's side to an extent and can more credibly appeal to Muslims than China can itself?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you that there's a legitimate concern that with growing Hindu nationalism, because regardless of and this takes takes a turn on India's domestic politics too. So regardless of the actual real threat to Muslims being from there's no real threat to Muslims from Hindu nationalism, contrary to what a lot of people think. But there's definitely a perception in the Indian Muslim community that the BJP is hostile to them. So, and that perception isn't going anywhere. In fact, BJP is pretty much given up on it. Like, of course, you'll have some, provocative speeches and by BJP members and all of that against Muslims. But by and large, there hasn't been significant kind of attacks on Muslims. Yes, of course, there have been Hindu-Muslim riots and all that have happened, but I'm still saying there's nothing close to a Nazi Germany or or CCP style genocide of minorities that's happening. But yeah, Pakistan. The whole point is that Pakistan doesn't actually appeal to most Indian Muslims outside of perhaps the Kashmir Valley region, because Indian Muslims, I'm sure that they know that whatever future they have, it is within India. They know that Pakistan is actually an economic basket case right now, and if whatever hopes they can have for a better future is as an Indian citizen as opposed to a Pakistani citizen or somebody more closely affiliated with Pakistan. And then on top of that, any kind of Muslim activity within India, that's Muslims in India are particularly scared of being identified with Pakistan, which is why, especially because they're scared that there'll be a Hindu backlash against them that will threaten their existence. So that's why the Muslims are have been quite careful in not showing any kind of sympathies with Pakistan. The only exception to that is the Kashmir Valley region, which has got an entire insurgency program funded by Pakistan. But yeah, the fortunate thing is that because there is no such China is not a country, because now that China is going to become the focus of India's external threat now. Like earlier, everybody used to think that Pakistan is the biggest threat, but after June 15th, everybody is now started realizing that it's China that's actually the biggest threat. So, and China has very little to do, very little affiliation or connection to Muslims. So in that sense, this external threat might actually promote more unity in India. And yep, so I see that internal divisions within India actually being sort of being closed or lessening with increased hostilities with China. Yeah.
Okay, just for some historical context, I want to point out that during the initial partition of India, which was largely driven by and when I say largely, I mean entirely driven by the sectarian difference between Hindus and Muslims and the desire for them to have separate states. Many people were killed on both sides. Between 200,000 and 2 million by most estimates, including 14 million people who are displaced because they lived on the wrong side of the border. So, I mean, these tensions have gotten very nasty in the past. It's good to hear that they are relatively calm now, although it's a little bit sad to hear that people are largely staying that way because they're afraid of violent backlash on either side. So, I mean, maybe the common enemy will unite India a little bit more, and that would be a good thing to come out of it.
Like BJP is like, while I said that BJP, remember that when I was talking about BJP, I never said that BJP has BJP might not actually go into a specifically anti-Muslim policy, but they do. It would be undeniable that BJP has often stoked tensions again. There have been a lot of hate speech cases by a lot of BJP leaders against Muslims. So, like, the perception that Muslims might not ever vote for BJP is correct. But I think that, with the focus from Pakistan had become an integral part of BJP's, Hindu-Muslim politics. And by, denouncing it as an external Muslim threat. But now that China is just not exactly this kind of a threat which is Muslim or anything in nature, so that prevents the BJP from making it a religious kind of issue, and instead making it more of a nationalistic kind of issue. So in that sense, it's China as a threat is a better enemy to have than Pakistan, definitely, even for India's own internal sake.
So I guess the other question we need to address is where do other parts of the world fit in? Because I think we are a little bit remiss if we don't talk about how, countries like the countries of the EU or the countries of the African Union, or I would say South America. I don't really think there's much involvement of South America here, but I think there are other second or third order impacts. I don't know, Devansh or DJ Trump, if you guys have any input on that.
I don't know. And if I learned anything from the NATO spending controversies, that you never really expect anything from the Europeans. Yeah. Except for Poland. Can't forget about Poland.
Another thing, the impact of this crisis is actually one country which I think you forgot, and it's quite understandable because it's been a declining great power, but it's still quite powerful, and that's Russia. Now, Russia is actually, in fact, yesterday, the India's defense minister left for Russia, and Russia is a country that's quite uniquely positioned in this entire, geopolitical maneuvering that's going on. Russia has very strong relations with both India and with both India and
China.
Both India and China, and it's actually growing closer and closer to China. So there's been there'll come a time. However, it remains a very important defense supplier for India, and that's it. And so in that sense, there's going to be a lot of reassessment within Russia and India as to how exactly they need to move forward with their relationship. Russia does not want very strong hostilities between India and China, but I don't think that's actually going to be their wish is quite unrealistic. So I mean, so Russia is going to have a tough time figuring out its priorities, given that the Western world still remains quite hostile to it. So Russia and India relationship is definitely going to go for a rejig. India will have to start basically either start developing their own defense equipment or sourcing it from the West. Most probably a combination of the both, because as long as West remains hostile to Russia, Russia will grow closer and closer to China, even if it doesn't want to. The second thing, as for the EU, is that the EU doesn't face a physical threat from China. They don't have a China is not a threat to EU's sovereignty. So that's why EU can, afford to be much more hedged in their, bets against Beijing. And EU is the statements from European countries have been quite neutral as far as the India-China crisis is concerned. So, and I'm not sure if the EU can even be trusted to take the side of its protector, the United States, in this ongoing geopolitical conflict that is going to start between America and China. So, yeah, the EU is going to be pretty. However, I'm not sure. I'm not sure like if you can be completely trusted. But let's see how that goes. Hopefully, they realize that partnering with a communist dictatorship is not exactly in their best interests. As for the other Asian countries, I think they're gonna get more and more, worried about China. There's this, been talks of this quad between like India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. That's gonna get more focused right now. All the other East Asian countries that are not vassals of China, they're gonna get really, really worried, and anti-China opinion is gonna gain more ground, because again, China is a direct threat to the sovereignty of all of these countries, as opposed to the European Union or the African Union, where China doesn't exactly pose a direct threat, and that's why they can afford to be more play by both sidism. Yeah.
The last thing I might
Yeah.
add on that,
Mm-hmm.
I will press just because I know that China has significant influence through the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and in other parts of Asia, etc.
Yeah.
And even one might say interference. And I wonder, one, not that India has as many resources to devote to such foreign dalliances, but has India made any effort to try to capitalize on that? As the United States certainly has, but has India attempted to take advantage of any of that? And also, is India just paying attention? Because even if it can't afford to do anything, perhaps it can, make small diplomatic overtures. And also, what is your view? How do you think that will affect the India's and China's relationship, since China has both, in principle, the ability to influence these countries in its favor, but also the risk that some of them may have backlash?
Oh yes. So yeah, as for the African and Asian countries, now there's this thing called the debt trap diplomacy that China is playing. So while it might actually offer a lot of these loans and sort of financial assistance to all these countries, in reality it's trying to enforce its own kind of colonialism. So I think the Indian government has insufficiently paid attention to this entire, diplomatic engagement that's going on between China and a lot of African countries. I think Indian government should do a lot more, and they should engage more with Africa and other parts of Asia. As for South Asia, like China has been, trying to whip up tensions between India and all of India's neighbors, frankly, like even with Nepal now, just a moment, yeah. Even with Nepal, which used to be a very friendly nation with India, now China's, sort of bribed the Nepalese Communist Party to, have even more hostile relations with India. So India should, in my opinion, like while it doesn't have the same resources as China, it should still, try to explore all those countries which are a victim of this debt trap diplomacy, extend whatever limited resources it has to these countries, and try to form better partnerships with them, because a lot of them are realizing the threat of Chinese actions on their own sovereignty, it's these are poisonous gifts which the China is giving, and India should definitely work on talking, having greater engagement with those who are affected by them.
Okay, well, that's. Is there anything else, DJ Trump, since we're getting toward the end of our segment?
No, honestly, I think we've had a really comprehensive discussion. I'd like to thank Devansh for coming on and talking with us, and I think that's really about it, unless anyone else has anything to say.
I just wanted to thank both of you for inviting me to this conversation. It was great, discussing modern geopolitics with both of you, and I wish both of you all the very best in your future endeavors.
Likewise,
Well,
thank you very much.
And I will also thank you for coming on, Devansh, and also, of course, thank DJ Trump for another good segment. And thank you to our listeners.
Absolutely. DJ Trump
Thank you.
signing off.